Hey guys, Ramsey here. Welcome to another video. Today we have another niche fragrance review. I've been on a little bit of a niche fragrance marathon review lately. Done a lot of Frederick Malls, and I'm going to do a review today from the house that I think is probably primed to kind of replace Frederick Mall now that Frederick Mall is stepping aside as maybe one of the most premier niche houses. Frederick Mall was seen as one of the premier niche houses before Estee Lauder purchased them. They've since had some ups and downs since the purchase of Estee Lauder, and then of course now Frederick Mall sort of leaving the brand, of course, is going to change the whole dynamic. Some people are trying to stock up on Frederick Mall fragrances before he leaves the brand. And so today we're going to talk about a house that I've been very enamored with and very complimentary of. And today we're going to do a review of Les Indemodables Musc de Sables. Okay, so now, before we get into the review though, just really quick, a brief unboxing, and I'm just going to show you this because there's like names and informations on both sides, but it is from Roshan, so thank you, Roshan. It is very, very kind of you to send this along. She basically reached out and said, hey, there were some fragrances that I think you should smell that I have, and I want to send them your way. And I said, please, be my guest. I would love to. And she very kindly did just that. So actually, these are going to be samples. So let me just try to get this open without showing her address or mine, although mine's just a P.O. box. So if you want to send me perfume to my P.O. box, you go right ahead. But so here's what she sent me. Big thanks for your videos. I've learned so much and I appreciate your effort. I hope you have here enjoy the samples. Thank you. Thank you, Roshan. Very, very kind of you. So she sent me these little bad boys, and one of them is Darren Allen's Sheeper number 1, which I actually have and absolutely love. And then she sent me, oh gosh, I don't think there's names on these labels. I gotta go back and check. She put it in the email, I think. So I'm gonna check the email here, and I just can't remember exactly what she was sending me. So I will check this, but thank you. Thank you for the samples. No matter what they are, it is a blessing, and I'm very, very blessed to have such kind folks in the community. Okay, so that is the very quick unboxing out of the way. So let's talk a little bit about Musc de Sables. Came out in 2018, and this is an Antoine Lie creation. In 2017, Antoine Lie almost kind of took over as in-house perfumer of Les Indemodables. And this is a musk-heavy fragrance. Parfumo says it's spicy and sweet. I will try to draw some imagery of how viewing this perfume, because honestly, I could probably get up here and just say, this is a fragrance that is dominated by musks. Goodbye. And you guys would probably understand 75% of the fragrance. I mean, for those of you who have smelled many musk fragrances, it is a musk-heavy composition. But to my nose and my way of experiencing fragrances, it's the other 25%. It's the details that Antoine Lie so excels at, in my opinion. So if you're a fan of things like Musc Ravageur by Frederick Mall, and the interesting comparison here, I could also grab Iris Poudre, although Iris Poudre, I don't have a full bottle of. I have a sample of, though, a Discovery Atomizer. I'll review that one as well one of these days. I'll also review Musc Ravageur one of these days, since I've been on a niche fragrance reviewing kick. But I have still done some old school reviews. I just reviewed MCM Success last week, so it's not like I'm ignoring the vintage side of things. But I have been knocking out these niche reviews. So Musc Ravageur is usually the very first thing that comes to mind when people talk about musk fragrances, and it's not a bad comparison in this case, because Frederick Mall in the past made no qualms about the fact that he liked taking inspiration from the past, okay? And Antoine Lie is brilliant at doing just that, kind of leaving little breadcrumbs, as I've said in some of my other Antoine Lie reviews, to past fragrances that have probably inspired him along the way, okay? But if you're a fan of a fragrance like Iris Poudre or Musc Ravageur, this is a must sniff. But I tend to smell this fragrance different from some folks. Some folks will say, and I think there's even a Fragrantica article sort of detailing the way that this person who wrote the article experiences it. And they say there's no chocolatey facets at all. It's just pure fleshy skin-like musk, okay? And I disagree, because to me, This opens up, and I just did a spray within the last hour, okay? It opens up like a powdery chocolate musk. I get chocolatey nuances and beautiful florals kind of dancing about. And so just imagine this, okay? Picturesque spring day, you know, a beautiful young girl in a flower dress walking around. She took mommy's sort of powders for her makeup and talcum powders and stuff like that out of her mom's bathroom, and she was kind of applying it to herself. And in the meantime, she goes outside and she decides, you know what, the flowers look so beautiful. Let's dump some powders on the flowers out front. They deserve to be beautiful, just like me and mommy, right? And I wouldn't be surprised if there's a touch of aldehydes in the top. There's almost a reminder, almost, okay, but very brief. They don't smell anything alike, but I keep thinking about old school, big, giant aldehydic florals. Like, for example, something like Goldmant by Amouage kind of comes to mind, but there's none of the pissy civet side of this. Some people are very offended by this fragrance, okay? But if you can just isolate the way that there's this grand powder feeling to the fragrance, and that's why Iris Poudre came to mind as well. But I wouldn't be surprised if there's a touch of aldehydes in most de Sables, but if you smell it from the atomizer, you get all base notes, all base heavy musks. But when you spray it, you get all of these little details, and that's where I'm kind of going with Antoine Lie's kind of brilliance here. There's also this very soft and powdery rose to my nose, and especially in the opening. The musk feels very fluffy and very whipped, like you literally put it in a blender and whipped it up. And it has this whipped feeling that's amplified almost by the powdery, chocolatey, or chalky sort of woody feeling from the Orris Absolute. There's a very high quality Orris Absolute that adds to the earthy, vegetal, outdoor touch of the fragrance. The fragrance feels very outdoorsy to me. Even though it's very, very musky, it seems very outdoorsy, okay? And so for me, if you just can picture this little girl, beautiful young girl, pouring powder from her mommy's basin, from her bathroom, into the flowers because she wanted them to be pretty as well. And finally, think about the powder note that you're smelling being amplified by this very posh and luxurious and high-class Orris, because there's a couple notes that make fragrances feel expensive to me constantly. One of those is Orris or Iris, you know, and here, this is the posh note. Orris is one of the posh notes, and then, of course, in classic Les Indemodables fashion, they decide to add this sparkling ambergris to the fragrance, and the ambergris here literally adds a sparkle. It's salty and almost sour ambergris, but it doesn't make the fragrance turn sour. It's almost like you can smell the ambergris note in isolation. Usually you can't do that. Normally, ambergris just kind of shines a spotlight. Here, it almost feels like you can isolate the ambergris note and you get this sour tinge to it, but the rest of the fragrance continues on. It continues on. So just imagine in your mind this very dull powder, okay, in the tin that the little girl is holding, right? When she opens it up and it's just filled to the brim with powder, powder is kind of spilling everywhere, all over the flowers, like I mentioned earlier. And the powder itself, when you're looking at it, it looks very lackluster and dull, right? Powder has that dull quality to it, right? But when you apply it, it adds this shimmer. It adds this, it makes your skin seem to dance and sparkle. It makes the flowers seem to dance and sparkle. And the shimmer and sparkly aspect is part of what the ambergris adds to this composition. I think that's one of the brilliance of Antoine Lie. You get his experience, but you also get the amazing high quality materials, which we'll talk about later on in the review. So I really like the start. I like how the fragrance, so when you first spray this fragrance, it's not like some fragrances where you're going to get hit with this, you know, Calabrian bergamot and lemon and grapefruit and all these citruses that just kind of lead you like you're on a plane taking off and slowly rising, right, till you get to the cruising altitude. This one, it's like you instantly are just blossomed into existence, all right? Mid-flight on the plane. There's no takeoff, there's no landing. You're just, bam, into the middle of the flight. And there's no chill start here, you know? There's no warm up, and I really like that about the fragrance. It's like, bam, you're in the presence of luxury all of a sudden. Like a beautiful woman walks into your kind of atmosphere, if you will. And even though you're kind of pretending to pay attention to the magazine on the rack or whatever else you're doing, you're really wondering if she's looking at you, or all you're paying attention to is how close she is to you. You know, there's that feeling of somebody beautiful and luxurious in your atmosphere, right? It just blossoms on your skin. And so when you spray it, you instantly get that it's just going, right? And I really like that about the way Antoine Lie started the fragrance. Um, but there's a grandness to the fragrance. There's definitely a grandness. And like I said, the citruses are not the normal lemon, bergamot. What it jumps to, though, is a very interesting citrus note that Les Indemodables calls a Italian green mandarin orange note, okay? And so the Italian green mandarin orange note is completely unlike the sweet, pulpy orange that most people think of. Most people, when they think of orange, if you go back and watch my video yesterday of music for a while, that's a great example of an orange that felt very sticky and sweet. And here, you know, you don't get that. It feels unripe. It feels green, like it's not ready to be picked. It feels very green. And you get this almost like slightly bitter undertone of neroli. And neroli adds to the floral aspect of the rose that I talked about earlier. Now, interestingly enough, there's no floral notes in this fragrance at all, but I definitely get some floral touches in here. And when you add the neroli, which adds a little bit of cleanliness, a little bit of soapiness, a little bit of white, and a little bit of green touches, and of course the green mandarin orange adds to the green touches as well, and the rose, which feels slightly green, slightly powdery, slightly soft, that I talked about earlier, that gives you that kind of slight floral touch in the opening, if you will. But the star of the show is the Sable, okay? And if you are an animal junkie, if you're a wildlife fan, you probably know what a sable is. I actually had to look it up. A sable is a mammal that looks like a martin, and it's heavily valued. These animals are very heavily valued for their dense, thick fur, almost like the value of like a mink, right? A sable is known as it's a late English word that comes from the Latin sabellum, and it literally translates to black fur, or fur of the sable is basically the translation. Okay, so there are these cute little things. You can look them up. Just put in sable coat, and you'll pull up some of these little animals. You'll see exactly what they look like. They're cute. They're fluffy. And if you do a Google search of sable fur coat, you will get exactly the imagery of what I think Antoine Lie was trying to create whenever he created Musc de Sables. I would guess that that's what the Sables means. It's pronounced, I guess, Sables in saying the word, but it just, the animal itself is a sable. But if you look up sable fur coats and just look at how dense and thick they are, almost like you took a million of these little animals and kind of put them together and to create this giant luxurious fur coat. That is the imagery, I think, of the fluffy, powdery, luxurious musk. Grand. Imagine being in a grand ballroom, okay? That's the feeling of the musk that Antoine Lie was trying to create. Most people think about musk being soft and powdery, and it is all that, but there's a lot more going on here, especially the chocolatey, powdery aspects that come together with the musks. And my guess is that chocolatey aspect comes from the patchouli. Now, again, some people don't smell that in here. I absolutely 100% do. And you know what it reminds me of? The very first thing I thought of is it reminds me of the chocolatey aspect, that the way Antoine Lie used the soft muskiness of Bel Âme. Bel Âme was supposed to be kind of a meditative fragrance. Eugene was very big into meditation, and Bel Âme was supposed to recreate that feeling of being at home and being at peace and putting your mind in that meditative blank state, right? And I've reviewed Bel Âme on the channel. You can check it out. I talked about those chocolatey, powdery aspects. And in Bel Âme, I wouldn't be surprised if, I can't remember if it had ambergris in it as well. Let's just look it up so I can be correct here before I just start saying things. Bel Âme. Bellum. It does not list ambergris as a scent, but it does list both iris and orris root, and musk. And so there definitely are some similarities. They're both listed as spicy, powdery fragrances, if you will. Musk de Sables is also listed as sweet, and the sweetness to me doesn't come as maybe strong as to some other folks. They mention this fragrance. So the blurb on the Les Indemodables website basically is a one-liner. I wish companies would add more than one line, but it basically says a sort of olfactory, radiant, solar mirage that will be a landmark in the world of balsamic musks orientals. So literally, that's their blurb. Balsamics, musks, orientals, / between the two. There is some more to the blurb, which we're going to talk a little bit about towards the end. But that balsamic aspect, I'm guessing, is where they're mentioning the word sweet. And usually when you get balsamic like notes in perfumery, you get like a warm, sensual, soothing character, oriental in feeling. That's usually how they describe balsamic like scents, and that's how it is described on Les Indemodables website, if you will. Okay. So, anyways, but yes, the chocolatey facets in here definitely blend with the balsamic aspects, and it reminds me a little bit of the way Antoine Lie made Bellum. Okay, so if you smelled Bellum, you're in the ballpark. Just imagine a more musky take on it, and the fragrance lasts on my skin. Also, another area that I differ from some of the other folks that I've seen talking about this. Not that they're wrong, because their skin and my skin may react very differently to the fragrance. That's the thing about this. This is a very this is very subjective. All right, it's not like a math problem where you can go in there and objectively say you're right and I'm wrong, or I'm right and you're wrong. This is very subjective to the way every person's environment, when they wore it, what the weather was, how many sprays they did, all of that stuff makes a difference, right? So for me, though, I will tell you, I wore this as my scent of the day to work today, and I could still smell my original spray from 10 hours ago. 10 hours ago, I could smell this. And usually for a fragrance that's soft and personal and musky and all that stuff, you don't expect that. But for me, this is easily a 10 to 12 hour fragrance. You can easily smell it. That goes to show the quality of the materials used here. And the other part of this scent, which continuously comes forward and starts, bouncing around in my mind while wearing this, is this almost like repressed sexuality. There's this, for a fragrance that focuses so heavily on the musky aspects. And again, like I said in the beginning, I could say this is just a musky, heavy fragrance and you would understand 75% of this scent, okay? But the talcum powder, the cloudy, fluffy aspects, the whipped aspects, are very dominant, right? And usually, if you go back to my imagery of the Sable coat, right, it manages to keep a relatively clean exterior, but there is this repressed sexuality. So what I mean by that is, if you can just imagine the woman I was mentioning earlier, kind of being in your in your atmosphere, in your immediate area, and you notice her, right, and then it's all you can think about, right? She's like right there. Imagine that woman wearing this kind of sable coat. Very plush, very luxurious, but underneath she's wearing nothing at all. You don't know that. No one else knows it, because all you can see is this big giant coat that makes her look like Mr. Puff from the Ghostbusters or something. Some $50,000 sable fur coat. But underneath, it's skin on fur. Skin on furry musk, right? And that imagery is how I would describe the muskiness in Musk de Sables. Very luxurious and plush, and slightly sexualized, but still clean enough to wear to work. Still airy and puffy and plush, and that's kind of the imagery. But there's also that musky, dense, extremely dense side of it. It's a contrast to the way that the musk feels. So imagine putting your hand into that really thick layer of rich, dense fur on the coat I was mentioning. You have to Google Sable coat to really get the imagery I'm talking about. But imagine you go in to try to grab that coat and your hand just sinks into this very plush, luxurious fur before you actually get to the jacket. You think you're going to get to the actual coat here, but your hand just sinks in. And that layer of thick, rich, dense is kind of the way that the musk feels in here. Okay, so so it's a weird contrast. All right, and sometimes when I smell Musc de Sables, what's interesting is I think of the clean style that's done in something like Clair de Musc, right? Clair de Musc is an extremely clean take on white musk, but it's almost so clean it's dirty, if that makes sense. There's a little bit of that in here, and then there's a little bit of the dirtier aspects of something like Goldman, the powdery, dirty aspects, but it's very repressed. Like I said earlier, repressed is a good word for this. Antoine Lie has a way of taking something from the past. You know, if you take some of these old vintage style, powdery, feminine, big, glamorous fragrances from the past, and sort of bringing them into the future, taking an old school style, leaving the breadcrumbs so you can still tell that it's of old school, that it's being, you know, inspired by past great fragrances, and bringing them into the future. And you know what else Musc de Sable reminded me of the more and more I wore? And you can see I put a pretty good dent in my decant. I've given this many wears. I've worn it in all different weathers. I'm wearing it in June today in Texas. It doesn't have to be cold. This is great in the heat as well. Is it reminded me of old Guerlains, you know? And I think the reason it reminded me of old Guerlains is there is a bitter almond note in Musc de Sables that keeps coming through, and it's a beautiful bitter almond note. And bitter almond is so prominent in many old Guerlains, that bitter almond note. In fact, Thierry Vasser made it one of the sort of centerpieces of the Guerlain Ideal line for men, the sort of designer-like line, if you will, right? That bitter almond note was used in many of the designer Guerlains, but also many vintage Guerlains use that bitter almond note as well. And if you just think about some of the old Guerlains that felt so alive, like they felt like they were living, breathing entities that had a soul. You know, when you smell some of those old Guerlains, you can't help but almost just have to sit down. They're so beautiful. And, you know, if you take a fragrance like Shalimar, right? Top 10 fragrance for me, okay? Shalimar is an absolute, utter masterpiece. And you could easily, even though there's no vanilla in this, right? There's no vanilla in Musc de Sables because it's all about the musk. But if you take something like Shalimar, the way it's constructed in its vintage style and the oriental touches, you could easily make a sort of string going all the way to some of the things that Antoine Lie is doing here. Or you could take an old Chanel like Chanel number 5. And that feeling of being something grander, something larger than life is kind of the way Musc de Sable wears on me. I don't think somebody who is young and doesn't have some knowledge of perfume history would appreciate this as much. I think this is for somebody, you don't have to be old to appreciate it. You don't have to be older, but you do have to be experienced, I think. I think somebody who hasn't sniffed some of the great fragrances from the past or doesn't really appreciate some of the fragrances that came before and they're going just for the new style stuff may not appreciate this as much. This does have one foot in the past and one foot in the modern times, and that's really what I think Antoine Lie is so good at. He's so good at taking a concept like this that most of us would probably shrug at if we just read the brief, and making it smell unique and special by using these very high quality ingredients and his knowledge of the past, and still making it very contemporary at the same time. So one thing about Les Indemodables I want to give a shout out to before we say goodbye is the quality of the materials used, because that's a very important part of the brand. But if you go to their website, not only do they say they use very high quality materials, and it's a big part of the brand itself. You can read all about their kind of backstory and distillation methods and all of that stuff, right? But they actually disclose the percentages of some of the ingredients used in here. So for example, if you go pull this up on Les Indemodables-parfums.com, it says green mandarin from Italy essence 4.9%. Patchouli Indonesia essence 1.1%. Ambergris tincture, 0.7%. And there's an entire special ambergris process that Remy uses. I believe I talked about it on my review of Ombre Supreme, which I reviewed from this house as well. But if I didn't, you can read about it on the website, I'm sure. And Iris from France, Essence, 0.3%. It says most expensive extract in the world in parentheses. So it says maturation, 2 weeks, maceration, 1 week. And I really wish more houses would give this type of information to the public, honestly. I know why they don't. I really wish this kind of way of doing business, disclosing the percentages in each fragrance would catch on. And I know why it hasn't caught on, because many of the other houses want to say, we use real Taif rose and expensive ouds, the most rare and utter ouds in our fragrances. But if they had to do it this way, you would have to see 0.000001 or whatever the hell is in there, right? And they don't want that. They want to be able to claim they use the most expensive rose oils without actually telling you how much is in there, or they want to claim they use high class Assam oud or whatever it is without actually telling you the percentages, right? So that's something I really would like to see catch on, and I applaud Les Indemodables for doing that, giving the percentages, even on the harder to use more expensive ingredients, giving the actual percentages. I really appreciate that from the house. And it's one of the reasons why I think this is one of the best niche houses for hardcore fragrance lovers. I think hardcore fragrance lovers will really dig this house. There's really a lot to offer, and you can't help but appreciate the beauty of the fragrances. Now, while we're talking about quality of the materials used, just a personal note on musk. If you've been following my journey, you know that sort of in the last couple of years, I've taken a little bit of a turn towards the artisanal houses, especially things like Ensar Oud, which I reviewed EO number 2 on the channel. This is a huge real musk fragrance. They use, it's really, really grown on me. I still portend that this has bits and pieces of Oud Picante in the opening. The way Oud Picante was used, that spiciness, which came out a year before this. I still say Ensar took inspiration from Oud Picante to create EO number 2, but the musks in the base of EO number 2 are absolutely to die for. And these real musk fragrances like Siberian musk, which I would love a full bottle of one day. But if I'm going to spend personally $225 on 50 mils, and you can see I have a decant, not a full bottle, but I did pay for this decant myself. But one of the reasons why I got a decant is that if I'm going to spend $225 for 50 mils, for me, I'd rather spend $300 or $350 and get a real musk fragrance, something like Royal Barn that's tinctured from real musk. They're nothing alike, but just as an example, I mean, that's kind of where my nose has been going. The quality of the materials Les Indemodables uses for the niche realm, all right, when you compare it to some other niche fragrances, is top notch. Les Indemodables is one of the top niche houses as far as I'm concerned. But I think there's still another level. And to me, some of the best musk fragrances are using real deer musk. And that is a really hard thing to overcome, because no matter how good the white musk is, they have all these different types of musk now. Black musk, I saw all the different names that some of these houses have. They're all different names for, synthetic musk fragrances, basically, right? And the real musk pod, just getting musk that is distilled from the real musk pod, is like nothing else for me. It's an experience like nothing else. Real musk is so beautiful. It's so hard to recreate. And so for me, when money is limited and you have to spend it on a certain thing, I would go to the artisanal houses at this point in my journey, especially since I already have the Musk Ravageurs and the Claire de Musks and the Goldmans and all this other stuff I can wear. I can wear these type of fragrances and get in the ballpark of most de Sables, and I still have whatever this is, 7.5 or 6 or 7 mils left. Okay, so that's kind of my take on it at this point. I would not buy a bottle of this, but I really appreciate it for what it is. So if you guys have experience with Mousse de Sables, do let me know. I'd love to hear your thoughts. I do think Antoine Lie is one of the best perfumers currently in the game doing things. So I'm always excited to smell and talk about his work. But if you have experience with this, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave it in the comments as always. We're still small enough that I can respond to every single comment. So good or bad, I try to respond to every single one. But as always, I appreciate everyone watching. Cheers, guys, and I'll catch you next time. Bye-bye.